Minister, I want to ask you for your views and that of the Government on the EU-Turkey migration deal in light of the fact that Médecins Sans Frontières have decided no longer to accept European funds from European member states due to their opposition to the deal. There's been criticism as well from Troika, from Oxfam, from others in relation to the operation of the EU-Turkey migration deal. And I would be particularly interested to know your views on that. And are you satisfied, furthermore, that the money in which government have committed on behalf of the Irish taxpayer towards this deal is not being spent on strengthening of borders and security, but is being spent in the interests of those seeking refuge?
Okay, Ara.
My understanding is we're grouping two questions together here on this.
Okay.
Numbers 23 and 24.
24, okay. Yeah, that's fine, you can answer it. There's only one introduction on it. And
if that's okay.
Questions then. I'll give both members supplementaries.
Thank you. I propose, therefore, to take 23 and 24 together. MSF Ireland informed my department on the 15th of June that the organisation globally had taken the decision that it would no longer accept European Union and Member State funding for its humanitarian programmes. They explained that Médecins Sans Frontières opposed the EU-Turkey refugee facility agreed by the European Council and believed that the EU asylum and migration policies have become increasingly more restrictive and inconsistent with the organisation's humanitarian principles. While not sharing this analysis, I respect the right of the group to take that decision. I recognise their important continuing humanitarian role. MSF is funded mainly by private donations. Its global income amounts to some billion euro. In recent years, about €50 million of this has been from the European Union and its member states. Through Irish Aid, we have provided a total of €5.6 million in humanitarian funding to MSF since 2013. It had applied for further funding this year and was due to receive some €1.6 million in humanitarian funding for programmes in Africa. In view of the decision not to accept it, this funding will be reprogrammed by Irish Aid. In relation to Turkey, I believe it appropriate at this point to place on record the deepest sympathy of the Government and the people of Ireland with the victims and families of the appalling terrorist attacks on Ataturk Airport in Istanbul on the 28th of June. We believe that Turkey has a key role to play in tackling the migration crisis and the unprecedented level of humanitarian need caused by the Syrian crisis. The EU and Turkey have engaged deeply on developing joint approaches to the crisis, which have been discussed at meetings of the European Council, most recently in March and June. The discussions in March were framed by the set of principles agreed at the previous EU meeting with the Turkish Prime Minister on the 7th of March. In the interim, the EU Council President Tusk had advanced work on potential agreement to ensure that partners' concerns were addressed and that the proposed deal was compatible with both European Union and international law. The June European Council noted that the legislation recently adopted by Turkey on the treatment of Syrians and other nationalities allows for the return of migrants to Turkey in full respect of the provisions of the Asylum Procedures Directive. The EU has initially agreed to provide a financial package of an additional €3 billion with the setting up of a refugee facility for Turkey to coordinate and streamline actions financed by this package. The facility provides a coordination mechanism for actions financed by the European Union and Member States, designed to ensure that the needs of refugees and host communities are addressed effectively and comprehensively. Ireland's contribution over a period of 4 years will be just under €23 million, starting with €5 million this year. Ireland is participating in the Facility Steering Committee, which meets in Brussels. The EU is also committed to deciding on further financial assistance for refugees in Turkey. It has also put in place humanitarian aid to assist with the provision for asylum seekers and refugees in neighbouring Greece.
O'Brien.
Minister, would you not agree that MSF's decision no longer to accept funds really underscores a major problem with this arrangement? Like, from the very outset, Fianna Fáil expressed its reservations about this arrangement. I would also say that, I'm particularly concerned about the treatment of those fleeing war and persecution, and that Turkey has been designated a safe country, and been designated a safe country for refugees, even in light of the fact of their human rights record themselves, the recent shutdown of media and arrests of journalists. I think there's, like to quote MSF, they've argued that the European response, and I would agree with them to some degree on this, has focused on deterrence rather than providing people with the assistance and protection that they need. And what I would like to ask you, by way of a supplementary, again, is that, you know, if you take the issue of unaccompanied minors as part of this deal, if you take the issue of Ireland's funding already here, as to how sure are we that that funding that you have pledged in the London Pledging Conference is actually going to where we want it to be, or is it going just to simply strengthen hard borders within Europe, to stop migrants fleeing into Europe and those who are being persecuted, particularly in Syria and Iraq?
Thank you, Deputy. Tara.
On my feet on the subject of migration policy, Gael, I want to clarify a matter. On the 28th of April, during statements on migration and refugee crisis, I reacted to remarks made by deputies in the House, Deputy Mick Wallace, Deputy Claire Daly, by making a rather flippant remark about Deputy Wallace's visit to Dunkirk and Calais. I subsequently apologised to Deputy Wallace outside the House, but I now wish to formally apologise to Deputy Wallace, and indeed on the record of the House. But can I say, in response to Deputy O'Brien, Turkey remains an essential partner in attempts to manage the current migration crisis. The European Union and Turkey have engaged deeply on developing joint approaches to the migration crisis. I take seriously the point raised by Deputy O'Brien, and I have conveyed the concerns at the highest level. EU heads of state and government in Turkey reached an agreement at the March European Council. The EU refugee facility for Turkey is a direct follow-on from that agreement, providing the financial support of €3 billion to underpin the deal. €2 billion of this funding will be from member state contributions, assessed on a GNP basis by the Commission. Ireland's assessed contribution to the facility over a 4-year period will be almost €23 million, including €5 million this year. But I'm conscious that these monies will go solely towards the relief in the form of humanitarian response.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Donoghue-Lira.
The EU's current policies are shameful, very damaging and dangerous. And it's appalling to see the EU pride itself on human rights while systematically pushing people away and their suffering away from the shores and leaving them to suffer in overcrowded camps on Mediterranean islands. The EU-Turkey deal has placed the very concept of refugee and the protection it offers in danger. Tá ceist ná fiú faoin bonús tríúil den policy seo. Ach an Ishtán Comisiún ag iarraidh seo leanú amach go dtí sé hir déag eile. For months now, Minister Sans Frontier has detailed how the EU deals with third countries to expel asylum seekers are having dire humanitarian consequences. As a state, we have prided ourselves on our role in the world in many respects. In that context, why aren't you and your department listening to the concerns expressed? Why aren't you standing up for the human rights of some of the most vulnerable people in the world? These new deals, Minister, would impose trade and development aid cuts on countries that do not stem migration or facilitate forcible returns, rewarding those who do. So that incentivises fair treatments of refugees.
Tara.
Well, I have to say again, Gael, that Médecins Sans Frontières is mainly funded by private donations. If it takes a view that it will no longer accept donations, well then, you know, that remains a decision for the charity. But I have to say, in response, that Turkey remains an essential partner in the very difficult and challenging attempts to manage the current migration crisis. The European Union and Turkey have engaged deeply on developing joint approaches to the crisis, including the deal, as I said, agreed in March. It's fair to point out that there has been a very significant decline in the number of people attempting to cross the Aegean Sea from Turkey to the Greek islands since the agreement entered into force in March. And while the EU-Turkey deal faces a number of challenges, it's clear that both sides understand the importance of working well together, and we will continue to do so in relation to our engagement with our EU partners on this issue.
Minister. Deputy O'Brien.
I thank the Minister for
I'll take two supplementaries together and one reply.
I thank the Minister for his response, but if you leave MSF out of it, look at Trócair's concerns about this deal, look at other charitable organisations' concerns, that, like Trócair themselves had said that the EU-Turkey plan is not designed in the best interests of refugees or asylum seekers. And as Deputy O'Leary said there also, is that states are effectively being rewarded for resettlement of those who need our assistance. And I would just like to finally ask you, though, what plans have we got to expedite our refugee resettlement programme here in Ireland? You outlined figures earlier on today that I have asked you at the Foreign Affairs Committee previously. I think, and whilst we're not behind the European average, I think the European Union itself should hang its head in shame for the slow response to what is a human catastrophe happening right on our borders. And there was, as the crisis unfolded, a feeling within Ireland here that people were saying, well, we'll take 2,000, we'll take 3,000, 4,000, 5,000.
Thank you, Deputy.
And we've had, as you outlined earlier on, a matter of tens of Syrian refugees coming here. And we should do a lot better. So I would like to know what plans are there to expedite the refugee resettlement programme here in Ireland.
Deputy O'Leary.